we're going to be continuing with the rest of Bluebook Practice 5, and we're on number 5. Which choice completes the text with the most logical word? While recent scholarship has undermined claims that the works of 12th century Islamic philosopher Ibn Rushd were blank, other Muslim philosophers of the time, it is indisputable that his location in the Muslim world area of what is now Spain meant that his works were primarily available thousands of miles west of the era center of Islamic thought. Okay, so it's saying recent scholarship has undermined, meaning downplayed, claims that the works of the 12th century philosopher were blank, and it's saying it is indisputable that his location meant that his works were available thousands of miles west. So it's saying how his work is actually available far away from where the epicenter is, but then scholarship has undermined that. So we're going to find a word that suits the blank. It says controversial among others. So it never talks about how the other philosophers think, so that doesn't count. Antagonistic, same thing. It doesn't show any enmity. Imitated by. It never says anything about other philosophers copying him, so inconsequential. And then inconsequential is correct because not significant too. Since his works were primarily available in Spain, he lived far away from the Muslim world, and his Muslim influence on contemporaries was limited. Okay. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole? He hired himself out for 3 months, at the end of the time to receive for his wages 200 acres of land lying in New Hampshire. His employer proving false to the contract in the matter of the land, and there being no law in the country to force him to fulfill it. Israel, who, however brave-hearted and even much of a daredevil upon his pinch, seems nevertheless to have evinced throughout many parts of his career a single patience and mildness, was obliged to look for other parts of livelihood than clearing out a farm for himself in the wilderness. Okay, so it's asking how does the underlined portion serve as the text in the whole. So let's analyze the underlined section. It's saying he's brave-hearted and a daredevil, but he lacks patience. And it's saying because of that, he had to find other livelihood other than instead of buying a farm, which he wanted to do in the first place. So we're going to have to find something that has that right there. It implies that Israel treasures a particular character of his personality when the characteristic should usually be regarded as a flaw. It never shows how he thinks of his own characteristics, so no. It suggests that if it now were for a certain aspect of his character, Israel might not have been easily thwarted in his ambition. Well, that's exactly what we just discussed. So it could be B. It shows why Israel would not have been able to undertake the enormous amount of labor necessary to run a farm, even if he had owned the necessary property. This is never shown in the text. It never talks about him being lazy, so it's not C. It explains why, when the situation required, Israel would undertake courageous acts that others would generally avoid. This is never mentioned in the underlined section about his courageous acts. It just talks about how he was brave-hearted, so it's not D. Which choice best reveals structure of the text? Changes to vegetation cover and other human activities influence carbon and nitrogen levels in soil, though how deep this effect is unclear. Hypothesizing that differences in land use can lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the top layer. So it's saying they're hypothesizing that different land use causes differences in the levels beneath the topsoil layer. So they tested this out by saying They sampled multiple land use types in Ethiopian locations. They found though is our transition. Though across the landscape decreased to comparably low levels beyond depths of 30 centimeters. So it's saying comparably, meaning they're almost the same. So we'll look through each one. It describes a phenomenon that scientists do not fully understood, and then explains a research team's hypothesis about the phenomenon. It describes a finding that led the team to refine the hypothesis. This sounds correct, so we'll keep it for now. An interesting unresolved scientific question presents a research team's hypothesis pertaining to that question, and then describes an observation made by a team that conflicts with the hypothesis. This is stronger than A, so we'll keep B. It discusses a process that scientists are somewhat unclear about, introduces a competing hypothesis about that process, and then explains how a research team concluded that one of these hypotheses is true. In the text, there's only one hypothesis mentioned, so it's not C. It explains a hypothesis that has been the subject of scientific debate, and discusses how the team tested the hypothesis and then collected data that validate the hypothesis. So actually, it disproved the hypothesis, so D is the opposite. So look at A and B. So they never refined the hypothesis. They just disproved it, so it's not A. Okay. Efforts to automate classification of paintings into different artistic styles have little success, and we probably would have reached the technological limit of this work. Furthermore, it is not obvious that this is even a useful endeavor, as several critics have argued differences between artistic styles are inherently subjective and not often the best way to understand relationships between works. That's text 1. Text 2. Baroque painting utilized a very similar color palette as Renaissance painting did to depict largely the same subjects as the Renaissance painting depicted. Automated artistic style classifiers often struggle to draw distinctions between the two styles, but they were able to achieve a high degree of accuracy by running one classification model atop another, an approach that demonstrates how an iteration is possible. So text 1 is saying automated is bad and we have reached the limit. But then 2 is saying they found a new method and demonstrated that it's way more capabilities than previously thought. So A says, by emphasizing there are still advances being made in automated artistic, this could work. By criticizing previous research into automated artistic style groups for focusing on a narrow group of styles. So it never talks about the range of styles, so it's not B. By arguing that most people are not able to correctly identify the styles, well, it never talks about people identifying, it talks about artificial identification. People may develop uniform ideas, no. What can be most reasonably inferred from the text? To understand how temperature change affects microorganism-mediated cycling of soil nutrients, Eva collected plant soil cores in the Tatra Mountains at elevations at around 2,100 meters and transported them to elevations 1,700 to 1,800 meters, where the temperature is warmer by 2 degrees. Cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores, but composition was unchanged. So she attributed the acceleration to increase in microorganism activities. Okay, so we'll look at all the inferences. It provided preliminary evidence that the microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. So this seems right, so we'll keep it. There's no obvious red flags. For B, it says, suggested that the temperature-induced changes in microorganism activity may be occurring at increasingly high elevations. Well, this is the opposite of what's happening. They increase as the altitude gets lower. It ruled out a potential alternative explanation for the acceleration in microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling. So, allowing her to attribute the acceleration. So she's directly saying that that is the cause. So it could be C. It clarified that microorganism activity levels in the plant soil course vary depending on which microorganism comprise the community. Well, that's wrong because it says, crucially, microorganism community composition was unchanged. So it's between A and C. It provided preliminary evidence that the microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling will accelerate. Well, this is already given. This is not an inference. We have to infer something based on the evidence. So this is just restating what was already in the text. Which choice most effectively uses the data? Okay. Patients are normally told that they're receiving a placebo, but a research team conducted a study to see if there might be a medical benefit to telling them. Various measurements evaluate participants with higher indications greater well-being in each measure. Compared to the mean ratings after 21 days for participating in the control group, the mean ratings for participants who were aware of taking a placebo blank. Okay, so we're going to have to see how, if there's a medical benefit. So we're going to have to see if the placebo group is higher than the control group. So we can see that every single time the placebo is higher than the control group. So A, range from 5 to 92, and never indicating that the well-being varied widely from participant to participant. Well, this is wrong because it doesn't compare placebo and control. The placebo were lower for the two measures with the rating. Well, that's also not true because for every single measure, placebo is higher than control. Range from 3.9 to 46. No rating indicated well-being in any measure for these participants. Well, that's wrong because 3.9 to 46 correlates the control group, not the placebo one. We're higher for all three measures, indicating greater overall well-being for the participants. Correct, because every single time the number is greater than the control group. The researchers concluded that the longer leave times might not confer to a greater cognitive benefit than short-term leaves do. Okay. So we're going to have to find evidence that says long-term leave is worse than short-term leave in the case of mean test score. So we'll look at each graph here. So for the first one, no leave did better than 2 to 4 days and the same as 1 to 5. This cancels each other because although this wouldn't work because we were asked to compare the shorter one to the longer one. So for the middle one, the shorter one does worse than the longer one, so we can rule out the first one. And the second one, 2 to 4 days did better than the longer one, so I have to look at the second one. In the second administration, participants who took 2 to 4 days of leave had higher attendance scores than those who took no leave. But in the third assessment, those who took no leave had higher scores than 1 to 5 weeks of leave. Well, this compares no leave to high leave, so this wouldn't work. In both the second and third administration, participants who took 2 to 4 days of leave had higher attentiveness score than participants 1 to 5 weeks. This directly supports the claim because it's saying longer times may not confer to a greater cognitive benefit.